Hello and welcome back to the Ladies Wrestling Grio podcast. And we are in 2023. We made it. We made it through. We are in the first month. And I think with all of the excitement, probably a lot of bit of frustration and trials and joy from the holiday season, I thought it would be perfect to start off this new year with doing something that I've wanted to do for a while with the podcast, which started as an audio podcast. And over the past few months, we have transitioned into having this video podcast. I really wanted to have a certain time in the year, which can change, where it could be a bit more frequent, depending on how many books from female wrestlers come out or just women in the industry come out. But I really wanted, since I started the podcast before last year, I think it was, I started the Ladies Wrestling Grio podcast officially in, I would say, maybe September or October 2021. I really wanted to spotlight some great women's wrestler biographies that I saw. The thing that makes it to where it probably can't be an ongoing thing is that at this particular time, there aren't that many women's wrestling biographies, but I thought that it would be nice to spotlight in January a few that I thought really deserved to have some attention to it, because at that time that was the reason why I say at that time, because a lot of these books were created before we had a wrestling podcast, before we had an extensive look at these women's careers on Wikipedia, even though obviously there's many times where some information might be wrong, but it still overall gave a generation the ability to be able to know a lot about these wrestlers and know about their background and really get a great look at their career. Before that, we had biographies that were written about or had the participation of the wrestler, to really give a lens into the life before and during their careers, that I know as a fan I was very interested in seeing, because of course when you're a fan of someone, you want to know what their life was like getting into the business. Especially, I can say, when I started watching wrestling, it wasn't like you had this blueprint on how people get into the wrestling business. So it was always really interesting to hear the unique tales of how these men and women got into the industry. But so many times you would hear about how the men got into the business, what they went through, how was their traveling experiences or their backstage interactions with everyone. But many times you didn't hear about the women. Now, that was definitely due to, especially if we're talking about a pre-attitude era, definitely attitude era, and even maybe in the 2000s, you didn't get that much information about the women's experiences, because especially in America, there weren't that many women that were a part of a locker room. So many times you didn't get those DVDs or VHSs, and yes, I'm aging myself by saying this, of their careers. So sometimes you had to pick from little clips of certain shows and kind of get a glimpse into their lives. But as I mentioned during the sneak peek of this episode, there were times where we would be blessed with a bit of knowledge on these women in the business. I would say WWE in particular, where they would make special DVDs about their top drawing female wrestlers. Many times when they had their specialty shows like WWE Access, Bite This, and things like that, you would get a bit more insight into these women. But another thing that came to be a great cataloger of a lot of the WWE wrestlers was the opportunity for these wrestlers to get deals to make biographies. This was something that The Rock, Mick Foley, China, and others willingly wanted to be participants in. And it was a great way to archive that particular time in their career. And who I'm going to discuss at this stage of my book review season is Lita. She also participated in this, and this is the book that we will be discussing today, Lita, A Less Traveled Road, The Reality of A. Dumas. And at this time, if I'm correct, I think this was when WWE had one of my favorite shows, that was just awesome because remember, we didn't have YouTube or anything at that time, or a lot of podcast commentators, what have you. So shows like WWF Confidential, where they would just take out maybe an hour to go over certain things that were more of a peek into the backstage going ons, or looks at the superstars when they were kids and what inspired them to get into the business, or seeing glimpses of them on the road to see what great places they were going to and what the wrestlers were doing there. This show really provided that look into it. So I think that having these books were kind of a precursor to WWE wanting to kind of join, I would say, more of that MTV early 2000s look into different artists, musicians, movie stars, lives outside of their careers, and really giving fans a look into it. So wrestling wanted to, of course, take part of that because we were getting, I would say around the 2002 onward, we started to get a bit into an earlier precursor of reality TV, where you can kind of see what the wrestlers' lives were like. Now, obviously, that has morphed into something huge now, but at the time, it was something where you wanted to give just like a peek into their lives without, of course, completely showing how the magic was done. So I think that with Lita's book, along with the other wrestlers that I listed, I think it was a perfect middle ground where it gave fans more of an insight into the wrestlers' lives, made them feel more connected to these wrestlers while still giving them a certain level of privacy, probably a bit of privacy that they would enjoy now. I mean, as we're in more of a social media phase where everybody wants to be in every part of the wrestler's business. But let's dive into this. And because there's so much that was mentioned in this book, so many different parts of Lita's life, and before wrestling and during wrestling in this, I don't think there was any way that I can just do it in one part. So let's just dive more into the earlier years. And on another episode, I would definitely have a part two to really get into life with Lita when she was deep into being in the peak of her wrestling career. So to just get into an earlier part, I don't know how much Lita worked on the book, but I feel just like you could, feel with The Rock's book and China's book, that there was some great insight that these wrestlers gave, or even if they were jotting down notes to give to a ghostwriter so that can be more their personality and more their point of view on their life in it. You can really feel that with this book. And I really appreciated that. I can feel Lita's personality and her voice in these pages. And A Less Traveled Road was released after Lita had sustained a neck injury, a serious neck injury at the time. And no other woman in the company had ever had a broken neck. At that time, the only person that you could really look at that was able to successfully come back after having such a serious injury in WWE was Stone Cold. So these were the two that were kind of holding up that banner that they could sustain an injury like that and come back. So I think that even though that was a horrible thing that happened to Lita with the neck injury, I think that that was just fate's way of having Lita to look back at her career, look back at her life, and see how far she has come and go back down memory lane and really give the fans an insight to everything that she had done to get to this point in her career. So it was a great time of reflection. And this book begins with Matt Hardy giving an incredibly sweet dedication to Lita in the introduction. He was speaking to her perseverance, her determination, and drive to make it in the wrestling industry, and how she is truly the alluring punk rock girl that fans loved her for, and how she is as real can get. And Matt hoped that the ultimate takeaway from this book would be the idea that you need to follow your dreams and live life to the fullest, and to remember these words exactly. Don't try to be something that you're not. Forget about patterning yourself after someone else. Be true to yourself and stay real. So I thought that was really cool that Matt gave such a great introduction. And I didn't want to, say everything verbatim, because even though this is review and I will be going through a lot of things, I think it's a great idea for us as fans of women's wrestling to make sure that we are supporting books like this, even if it has been in print for, gosh, I don't know, yeah, about 20 years at this point. We need to make sure that these become things that we're collecting and adding to our catalog of memorabilia, because these are very important moments in these legends' careers that we definitely want to keep. So I wanted to make sure that I had a fine line between showing you and talking about the things that were happening in the book, but not giving everything away, so that you might still feel inclined to want to purchase the book. But that's why I didn't want to give everything away in the introduction. But I just thought Matt Hardy had some really sweet words and very supportive words to say about, and also that it was almost like he was reflecting on what a trail that Lita blazed to, to really create a unique spot for women in wrestling, and how he was very much a fan of Lita. So I thought that was really sweet, and it just goes to show how Lita's character was really loved throughout many demographics, and there's so many guys that were really fans of what Lita did. Sorry, sometimes I'm going to be looking because there's certain things in my book, because there's certain things that I thought was really cool to highlight, So yeah, I thought it was really cool that um, Matt was giving that type of love, to Lita, and really showing how supportive he was of her career and what he thought about already, because this was made in 2003 already, what she accomplished with having such a meteoric rise and getting the ability to do so much, I would say within the span of 2.5 years at that point. So that just goes to show, especially during the Attitude Era, how you had certain people that had really like memorable careers already in the span of like 2 years or 2.5 years. So that just awesome introduction. Amy Dumas, known to the world as Lita, was born April 14th, and her parents, Christy and Mike Dumas, got married right out of high school. Lita has a brother named Billy that is almost 5 years younger. However, they weren't as close. As Lita put it, she was a good natured, easygoing kid, while Billy was just totally evil tempered. He would beat her up and she would get in trouble for it because she was older. And I'm sure that a lot of people can relate to that, and that growing pain of having to have the burden of being the older child. And regardless of whatever your younger brother or sister does, you have to pay the brunt of it. So I thought that was really funny that Lita put in the trials and tribulations that she had with her brother Billy. But I think a little bit more of a serious note, I think that that lack of accountability for many things that Billy would do, where his temper would get the best of him, I think that that certainly caused a rift between the two of them, and why they couldn't grow as close as siblings. So just like I mentioned, this was made in 2003, so I'm really hoping that there was this ability later on to get closer as siblings, but there's no way for me to know for sure. But at this time, they just weren't that close as siblings. And hey, it happens. We get it. No judgment. Because of Lita's dad's job, Lita was constantly uprooted from school and friends. She believed that that's what caused her to be a loner. She had a great relationship with her grandmother Maga, though, who loved to tell her stories while drinking her Schaefer beer and smoking cigarettes. One of Lita's favorite childhood memories was watching Pee Wee's Big Adventure when she was 10 and trying to imitate the bicycle scene and scraping her hands and knees. Clearly, this love for Pee Wee Herman continued on, especially when she was able to actually see Pee Wee Herman in person when he was a guest host on Monday Night Raw. And it's funny that this very vivid childhood memory was brought up in her book, and there was no way to know for her to know that not that many years from then she was able to actually meet Pee Wee Herman in person. And from what I gather, um, it was okay to meet this hero because he actually turned out to be a very nice guy that actually thought it was really sweet that Lita actually marked out to him, and she still loved him to that day. So I thought that was really cool that such a vivid memory was able to be lived out and not be something that or turned out to be a bad experience when she actually met Pee Wee Herman. So that's really cool. Lita's relationship with her dad wasn't really close either because she never felt like she knew him. It just felt like he was there, and her father explained later that the only way that he knew how to be a dad was to provide and to discipline. This is definitely not uncommon from dads of the boomer generation or just parents in general from the boomer generation. And I think that Lita mature enough to know that her dad did care about her, but that he just didn't know any other way to be a dad. He didn't know how to be extremely hands on with their development or to really ask on a daily basis how she was feeling. He just knew if you have what you need, if I'm providing a home for you, a stable life, relatively, because they had to move a lot, but a stable life, and making sure that you're going out into the world with certain discipline, then I'm giving you what you need. But many times, especially around the time that Lita was growing up, that was a very common thing. But I'm pretty sure, as it seemed like it was expressed in the book, there's still love there, but just not a deep closeness because of their relationship. In middle school, though, while living in Fort Lauderdale, Lita discovered that she could get along with and mingle with a diverse group. One minute she could be hanging out with the metalheads, the next she can go to the table with the kids that were blasting rap music and feel completely comfortable. She really liked her life in middle school, but just like Lita discussed already, her family had to move a lot because of her dad. So when she moved to Atlanta, however, the crowd wasn't as diverse and she started to feel like she didn't fit in. Then she discovered punk rock music and found her home. At the age of 13, she would go to the multiplex in Atlanta and watch bands like 7 Seconds and Circle Jerk play. Her mom let her explore her interests if she kept up with her schoolwork, and the hardcore community really became a family for her. Her friends consisted of skinheads, skaters, and straight edge rockers. So, wearing her Doc Martens, Oxbloods with double striped knee socks, cutoff socks, shorts, and a band shirt topped with a flannel was her thing at this time. This was the blueprint uniform for her to wear, and her bedroom was covered with band show flyers. So, this was Lita's life at this time. She knew what she felt comfortable in, and she completely embraced that. And I think that for her to be at such a young age and she was already discovering what felt comfortable for her, but also most importantly, she had a family with her mom that actually supported her finding out what she was interested in. And especially with Lita moving a lot at this time, is very important for her to have that support from her family to understand that wherever she goes, she has to find a new way to connect with people and to feel like there's some sense of belonging. Otherwise, it would just feel like you're a nomad, never really having anything that connects you with other people. So I thought that was really cool that her mom early on gave her that sense of support that she wanted her to be her own self and be her own individual. So she loved listening to the Dead Kennedys and Operation Ivy. She would write the band's letters, and sometimes they would actually write back. Back at a time where you could have a pen pal and discuss everything under the sun with someone that you never met. Now, this naturally freaked out her mom because the band members were older than her. So she found her thing, her community, and stuck with it. Because, mind you, Lita at this time was 13. And so she's writing to band members and getting responses, possibly trying to probably meet them at shows. So even though her mom was supportive, Lita was still a preteen at that time. So I'm pretty sure there were many times where her mom was probably thinking that there has to be a balance with the support where she still has to make sure that Lita is okay, but she's letting her find herself. So I think it's funny that there wasn't this sense of understanding that there has to be a level of safety that Lita has to have with going to these shows and trying to get to know the people in this world, in that world, that punk rock world. So swimming also was another way for Lita to find comfort in where she was. And she joined the swim team at her high school. At that time, she didn't take it as seriously as her peers, who were very competitive. So eventually she kind of wavered out of that. But it was something at the time that made her feel like she could find her footing in Atlanta. But shortly after that, Lita was hit a major blow when her parents divorced when she was 17. Her mom told her the news during lunch at a local Subway. Perfect timing. To say that Lita was distraught was an understatement. She never expected her parents to break up because, yes, the marriage was not perfect, but Lita and her brother never saw her parents argue, never had a disagreement in front of them. So for her, through her teenage lens, she didn't know that there were ever any problems. So this was a bit of a shock, to say the least. But of course, especially during this time, there was, I would say, maybe early to mid 80s, you had a lot of couples, I would say actually mid to late 80s, probably at this time. You had a lot of couples that on the surface looked like they had the perfect marriage, and their parent and their kids never knew that anything was wrong. But as the kids got more into their high school years, the parents would announce that they were getting divorced. And of course, this happened during Lita's senior year. So I'm pretty sure that that just was an awful time to hear this. So shortly after that, Lita, her mom, and Billy moved out of the home. And senior year wasn't that eventful for Lita, but she made it through, even though she was not excited to go to school at that point. And she graduated in December of 92. Lita was then able to move into her own apartment. Now, though she was still 17, the landlord was cool that she rented an apartment from and waited a couple months to make her sign a lease because, of course, you have to be 18, you signed the lease. So he was nice enough to just let that slide. So she had her apartment. She was 17. She graduated from high school, and then she bought a dog named Cody to make it complete. Immediately, Cody and Lita faced a tragic event when Cody was hit by an SUV. He ran into the street as just a very joyful puppy who wasn't really paying attention to what was going around him. And he ran into the street on his first day that Lita bought him. Miraculously, he was fine. And Cody went through a period where he had to learn to trust his new owner because unfortunately he did not have the best owner before that. So this was an experience where Lita really started to learn that just like humans, animals have to have a certain level of trust to really feel like they want to have that connection with you. But not that long after that, both Lita and Cody became as thick as thieves. And during that time, Lita worked at an animal hospital and she loved working with the animals and with her best friend, Bree. She was living a rock and roll life. She was going to shows, meeting new people, making new connections, and walking around with a flashlight at home so she didn't use too much electricity. So, look, the times were still hard for her financially. She was only 17 years old, so she was making her minimum wage work. Okay. Her home was always open for bands that needed a place to crash when they were in town. And at that time, she started to build a serious connection with one of her favorite band's dancers at the time named Bo. After they exchanged numbers during one of the shows, the two would talk on the phone every night. And this led Lita to travel from her home in Atlanta all the way to Richmond to see him. I believe it was every weekend. So she was really starting to get more into her adult dating life. And and really starting to travel a little bit, obviously more on a local level, but she was starting to get out there and try to see new things. And this was obviously due to her connection to Bo. And after months of traveling, pretty much every weekend, or her doing the traveling, she decided that she wanted to move to Richmond with Bo. But 2 days before signing a lease with a friend that lived nearby, she was going to have her own place, but still be close enough to see Bo. Bo told her that he changed his mind. That's right. Lita had moved out of her place in Atlanta, packed everything up, had made a connection to a friend that she had in Richmond so that she could have her roommate. And then all of a sudden, Bo told her that he changed his mind. And his quote was, "Obviously, I can't prevent you from moving here to Richmond, but I don't want to hang out anymore." Ouch. With uncertainty looming around her, and after deciding to drop out of college, Lita had hit the road with her friends in a band called 15. Let's talk about the fact that she did all of that. She got rid of a place where she had a really cool landlord. She decided to move from Atlanta to Richmond to be around her boyfriend. And he just decided to wait 2 days until she officially moved to Richmond to make it clear, I don't even want to be your boyfriend. I don't even want to be your friend either. I don't want to hang out anymore. Talk about still being a teenager and having these horrible, horrible breakups. But I love that despite the fact that she was truly hurt about that, she just decided, hey, I'm going to make the best of it. I'm in Richmond now. I'm just going to go hit the road with my friends and have a great experience. That's really being able to just dust yourself off and go live your life. So during this time, a friend told her that a bunch of them were going to get a group house in DC and she was welcome to live there. So you had 10 people occupying this group house instead of the recommended four. So it was certainly cramped. There was a self made recording studio in the basement where different bands will come to record in this house. And Lita lived in the laundry room with a washer and dryer right next to her bed for a whopping $80 a month. Talk about life in the 90s before all this inflation crap that we're dealing with now. So she had to put milk cartons under the mattress because the floor would flood. So, despite having all of these issues with living there, Lita did have fond memories of living there, learning how to play bass for her friend and singing a bit on the recordings. So, especially because of her age and because she was completely comfortable with having more of a humble um, punk rock life at the time, because just like I said, she was really young. A lot of these things were not affecting her as being bad experiences. It was just something that she felt like you just dealt with and you adapt and you're enjoying really being around your friends versus trying to always think about what you don't have and if you have very meager conditions. So Because of her low paying job that she had at the time, Lita would have to dumpster dive to get by and have meals. And at 18, she started to get tattoos. She let her inspiring tattoo artist roommate experiment on her. So she got a tattoo on her heel, then her arm, and half circle on her shoulder. But she didn't like these tattoos too much, but she allowed herself to be a guinea pig. So next came the word punk, which is on the inside of her lip, which she is very famous for having. So that all happened at this time in her life. And after that, she decided to get a real tattoo, go to a real tattoo artist, not her friend who's just experimenting. And she got a tattoo on the back of her neck. And this meant to mean that someone who tries to destroy traditional ideas or institutions. So this was the time Lita was exploring more of who she felt she was and letting things like tattoos help to express that to the outside world about who she thought she was and what she represented. So Lita played bass guitar for stints in short-lived bands that she helped to create. So artistically, it seemed like she was trying to explore who she was, and she certainly had a group of people in her house that were also doing that. They had bands. A lot of them were aspiring tattoo artists. They really wanted to explore musically what they could do. So I think that if you look at that, it certainly makes sense that that time living in DC for Lita was a great experience, even if there were some things that were a little bit hard financially. Those experiences of having people that really want to explore who they are and have things that can either fail or succeed, you can't really buy that. That's something that really helps to make you, because you're learning at that age to really just dive into seeing what can work for you, or sometimes just doing things for fun and seeing how it turns out. So even with reading it, it really made me feel like you can kind of get a glimpse into how transformative that time must have been for her. So it was a really cool read to see that chapter of Lita's life. So in 1995, Lita decided that it was time to travel. She wanted to go to Europe, see the world a bit, and spend some time in the summer in Europe. So even though she had decided in her mind that she wanted to have this adventure, the only problem was she was flat broke. So even though she made a chart on how she was going to do it, she volunteered at the University of Maryland for food credit, and even still dumpster dived, her piggy bank was still too light. So one of her friends brought up the idea of stripping as an option. So the strip club that her friend was working at was called the Royal Palace. And as we know, whenever something is called the Royal Palace, it is never royal or at all like a palace. But Lita went to observe one day, and though it looked just like a Chinese restaurant, she still wanted to give it a try, especially after seeing her friend rock the stage a few days ago. So, in Lita's words, this was a low rent place where the strippers had to dance to music playing out of the jukebox. Lita felt awkward wearing heels and makeup and held onto the pole for dear life, but she made it through the 15-minute audition. She was hired on the spot, and after 6 months at the club, the trip to Europe became a reality. She wanted to visit a country every day and sleep on the train. So she made friends in Germany and loved the freedom to travel to Italy, Belgium, Denmark, Prague, and London with just a train ride. In Amsterdam, that was where Lita got the famous tattoo on her shoulder. The tattoo just simply symbolizes her freedom and spontaneity. I think that a lot of people, as she says, tries to make the tattoo more than what she actually got it for. And she doesn't mind, but she just wanted to set the record straight that there wasn't some deep meaning behind it. It was just something that she felt at the moment when she was in Amsterdam to get this tattoo. And it was something that looked cool to her. So she just decided to get it. And I think that is something very strong about Lita's personality, is that she can have these great memories because she just feels what's right to her in that moment. And that's something that obviously we all love about her as fans. So already you can see this trip to Europe was something that she wanted, she planned for, and she worked hard for, and she had an amazing experience. So it lived up to what she wanted that trip to be. So upon returning home, she found a nice apartment, continued stripping, and hit the road again with her band friends. Now, around this time, Lita started dating her ex, Bo, again. Yeah, again. But, you know, in your 20s, sometimes you try it and you think that it might be different the second time. But, we still support our girl Lita, okay? So one night, Bo was watching TV at her house, and Lita was curious about what was happening on the screen. She asked him what it was, and he said, "It's Monday Nitro." So he started to explain what wrestling was, but it all seemed a bit silly to Lita. She thought that only rednecks that threw fake punches were in wrestling. However, the luchadors in WCW really pulled her in, especially Rey Mysterio. She loved the mysterious mask and his acrobatic high flying style. She wanted to watch every week after that. Her new curiosity about wrestling caused her to seriously think about becoming a wrestler. She took some time to visit her mom in Atlanta, and as luck would have it, WCW was having a TV taping there. Lita bought tickets, and she was on the mission to find out how she can be involved in the business. The WCW crew guys were watching her ringside, and they were using these 90s laser pens to get her attention. And guys, I'm gonna let you know, I hated those laser pens that people would have at live shows in the 90s. They were so annoying because they would just point the tiny laser in someone's face and it would just go directly into your eye wherever you were looking. And if they just decided to keep moving it, because many times they were far away from you, there was nothing that you can do about it. And many times, if you were a fan watching wrestling, and I remember this specifically, you'd be looking at the wrestler cut a promo, and that would be the time you would have some fan that wanted to move this laser around, and you would see the reflection in the wrestler's eye, and it was just so distracting. You could see sometimes it was even distracting the wrestler. So yeah, that's the pen that Lita's talking about, and it was like the most annoying thing. I'm happy that that stayed in the 90s. That can stay there. But anywho, one of the crew members that was watching Lita came over to flirt with her. So she used that as an opportunity to get a backstage pass. She hung out with the light guys and watched the rest of the show on the monitors. She also just walked around and saw wrestlers like Van Hammer and Glacier. Deborah McMichael, later known in WWE simply as Deborah, walked up to Lita and complimented her on her shoes. And Lita really loved interacting with Deborah behind the scenes that night because she was actually a fan of Deborah's Queen of WCW character. I'm just gonna say Lita's been having so much good luck with things that have happened in her life with being able to just have these experiences. So on the first time that she's ever been to a wrestling show, she gets to go backstage and get a pass and just walk around as freely as she wanted to. She even saw like the Nitro girls locker room. It was just awesome hearing about her experience being backstage in WCW. But Lita still had no idea, even after this experience, how to get into wrestling. So she took the suggestion of a friend and tried kickboxing. She didn't love it. She thought that it was very sterile and a controlled environment, but she did find the love for judo. She loved how judo was similar to submission wrestling. This showed her that she did crave this level of physical activity in her daily life. So while watching the cruiserweights on Nitro, Lita thought it would be a great idea to just go to Mexico and learn how to wrestle. So she called the travel agent and bought a round trip ticket to Mexico City without a clue of what she was going to do when she got there. I can't be that brave. It sounds really cool in your mind to think that you can, but Lita certainly had the gumption to just have an idea that she wanted to find out about wrestling and just go in and do it. So she found a cheap $12 a night hotel, was the only American there. But 3 years of high school Spanish kicked right in and helped her to navigate through the city. Lita assumed that everyone in Mexico knew where to watch Lucha Libre, and she was shocked to find out that her search was going to be much harder than she expected. Finally, after asking several strangers on the street, she found out about Arena Mexico. So she took a taxi and bought an $8 ticket from a scalper. When she saw vendors selling lucha masks in front of the venue, she knew that she was in the right place. Once inside, she saw a dirt floor and three rings in the middle of the arena. She felt like something was weird, but she went in anyway. Then all of a sudden, an elephant comes out and she realizes that she bought a ticket to the circus. Lita just so happened to show up on one of the weeks of the only 2 weeks of the year that Lucha Libre was not having a show at that arena. So she was in the wrong arena to watch wrestling that night. So after following some complicated directions and having to wait the next day, she found where the Lucha Libre was. So with her front row seat, Lita was able to see the show and see the differences between the Mexican shows versus the shows that she was watching in the States. For one, there were no guardrails. Some wrestlers were tossed out of the ring and landed on people in the first few rows. So Lita met CMLL, which is one of the biggest Mexican wrestling promotions in the country. They're still doing amazing to this day. She was able to meet the the press director at the time. His name's Enrique, and was allowed to go to the announce booth. For that being her first show, once again, just like her experience in WCW, it's just like she had like everything was aligned for Lita to fulfill her mission of finding out how to get into the wrestling industry. So for the rest of Lita's stay, she attended CMLL events and absorbed so much about the lucha libre style. During this time, she met a wrestler named Steel. They immediately became buddies. He later on became Val Venus. And after the time of their meeting, Val Venus was signed with WWE already, and he made a few vignettes that was soon to debut on WWE programming. So this must have been a very exciting time for Val. And I like that Lita met him, a bit before she actually went to WWE. So she was able to get a gauge of his personality and already have someone that she knew was in the company. So I'm pretty sure when they met up again in WWE, that must have been a pretty fun moment. Um, so yeah, she's starting to get, a bit acquainted with the people behind the scenes, the wrestlers that are coming for these CMLL events. And for the weeks that she was in Mexico, Lita attended wrestling events 3 times a week. During this time, this is when Lita met Papi Chulo, who would later become S.A. Rios. Lita was captivated by his raw charisma and elaborate mask. Now, we will talk about their partnership in WWE in the second part of the book review, but I thought it was really cool that immediately when Lita met him, she was very much captivated by what he brought to the table with his charisma, his in-ring work, and his very elaborate mask. So I thought that was cool that they already made that connection before she went on to WWE. So Lita was happy to see that the few women that were in CMLL, like Diabolica and Lady Apache, had such dynamic styles that blended Mexican and Japanese wrestling techniques. So Lita made a deal where she would work as a Corona model, which is still really popular on the shows where they would have the models that would be showing and advertising whatever they needed. And for her taking that deal to be a Corona model, she would receive training in the meantime. So in this one trip, Lita had gotten herself on CMLL TV and made some valuable contacts. Talk about having a plan while not having a plan, when you just go to Mexico and you just decide you want to learn about wrestling. I mean, the luck here is amazing. So after this initial trip, Lita was hooked and she decided that she had to save more money and come back as soon as possible. So she worked hard and booked a 3-week stay. Lita's persistence worked out for her when some of the luchadors agreed to train her. She learned the basics, and after all the takedowns, hard clotheslines, and running the ropes, Lita was invited to come back. The time training in Mexico City resulted in her making great contacts with other up and coming wrestlers and staying at the well known Wrestlers Crash Pad Hotel Mont de Mar, where the guys were a wild bunch and they partied hard. But they were all business in the ring and they did not take it easy on her. So this was a time where she was really seen, especially after that initial um, travel trip to Mexico, that she really wanted to do this and that she was really committed. And I'm pretty sure with some of the context that she made on her initial trip to for them to see her return, I think that that showed that she really did care about being involved in wrestling in some capacity. So shortly after Lita returned back to America, one of her contacts that she made, Kevin Quinn, invited her to come to an NWA 50th anniversary event in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. If she came, then she could have the opportunity to be a valet at the show. So at this time, at this NWA event, Kurt Angle, Test, Steve Carino, and Dr. Death, Steve Williams, just to name a few, were in attendance. And after the show, Lita was invited to NWA Mid Atlantic to wrestle. So this was already a great opportunity to be on an NWA show. And in the 90s, NWA and just NWA alliances, like all of the different NWA territories, weren't doing the best. Territories took a big hit in the 90s, but I always thought it was cool that all of the NWA affiliated territories were still trying to keep the memory and legacy of NWA alive, and they certainly had some great talent that was still involved with holding these NWA titles. And as you can see at this time, making sure that they were even celebrating the NWA 50th anniversary. And I think that that was a great show for Lita to be on that really helped to, put her face out there, while also showing that she still had a lot to learn. I mean, she felt that way herself. She barely had any training, even with going to Mexico the two times. So even though she was invited to go to NWA Mid Atlantic, she didn't feel ready. But she just put on her face and just did the fake it till you make it mentality and went anyway. And this proved to be a good idea because after this other show for Mid Atlantic, she was able to get more training. So she flew to the Steel Domain Training Center, which was ran by Ace Steel at the time. And because she didn't really have anywhere to stay, she slept on the beat up couch in the training center at night in a neighborhood that was not really desired by most. And she would watch wrestling tapes until she fell asleep. So Lita's first professional match was on January 9th, 1999 in Western North Carolina under the name Angelica. Lita kept getting booked and even had a chance to work with Leilani Kai under Mid Atlantic. And when I was doing research, because I really wanted to find out the full on history of NWA, of the NWA women's title, a few years ago, I started to see a huge role that Leilani Kai specifically played in the late 90s going into the 2000s for the NWA women's title. And she really helped with keeping, at the time, which was really hard on the indie scene, keeping women's wrestling alive because it just was really not the case. Usually women that were on the indie scene were valets. So for her to try to keep that up and try to work with women, for example, like Lita, that really wanted to wrestle, I thought that was great. So it's nice to see that someone like Leilani Kai, who was trying to keep women's wrestling alive on the indie scene in America, was one that Lita got to pair off with in a very early stage for her in wrestling. Was really cool. And also to hear that was a positive experience that both women had was really nice to read, especially because I am a fan of Lita and Leilani Kai. So that was really cool to hear. So on her third show in North Carolina, she was able to meet some local boys that had recently signed to WWE, and that those boys were Matt and Jeff Hardy. She says that she immediately knew that they were special when she saw them in the ring. And at this point, the Hardy Boys had already worked with WWE as extras for years. So they were being used as jobbers who are usually the sacrificial lambs that are fed to big names. And they wrestle with big names like Razor Ramon back in the mid 90s. So they had dipped their toe into WWE during those times, but now this was the time where they were coming on as full on wrestling talent. So it must have been such an exciting time for Matt and Jeff. And at the time, they were also running their own indie wrestling company called Omega. So you could see the passion and desire that not only Matt and Jeff had for their careers, but that they had for a lot of indie talent in the business. So I love that that was the time that Lita had actually met Matt and Jeff. And Lita had an awesome moment during this time where she was able to meet Luna Vachon at a Mid Atlantic show. Luna was an inspiration for Lita getting into the business, and the two met and they immediately hit it off. In Lita's words, Luna was as sweet as can be. And they would write letters to each other after that to keep in contact. And I must say, one of the things I also really like about this book is that when Lita was starting out and she was unknown, she was still getting trained, she was still really green. She was actually having these great experiences with very experienced veterans in the business, like Luna Vachon, like Leilani Kai, like Sherry Martel, as she mentioned in the book about the great experience when she met her. With this being done at a time, um, yeah, this was at the time when Lita was training. I believe it was pretty much at the uptick of the Attitude Era. You hear so many stories about how women were talking or dealing with each other at the time, and it wasn't great. How they were dealing with each other in the locker room. So this was so nice to see that Lita's experiences with dipping her toe into the industry, not, having experienced that, she had very responsible, very likable, very respectful veterans that were taking care of her in the ring, or even if she was just meeting them, they were being so respectful and giving great advice and helped her to meet people that she looked up to and not have a unpleasant experience with actually meeting them in person. So I love that Lita was mentioning that camaraderie, and I'm pretty sure the excitement that a lot of these legends had was seeing that there were women that were interested in putting on some great wrestling matches, and they wanted advice and mentorship with that. So that was really cool to see in this book. So soon Lita started hanging out with Matt more after the shows and immediately felt a connection to him. She felt that he was different from a lot of wrestlers that she had met. Their love for punk rock and alternative music brought them together as well. It was hard for them to find unique personalities like theirs in friends. So they also had a love for cheap little hotels. And I think that was due to them having this feeling that they loved hotels that had a lot of character to them and they weren't the generic hotels that most of the wrestlers usually stayed in. So I think like these quirky things that both Lita and Matt liked really helped to bring them together. And I thought it was cool how, and very sweet how Lita was talking about this initial friendship that her and Matt had developed, that of course we know eventually turned into something else. And Lita started to train with Matt and Jeff in the training ring that they had with the rest of the Omega wrestlers. And she saw the level of intensity and discipline that both Matt and Jeff had. And she really started comprehending what it took to be a wrestler on a WWE level. Because at that time, getting into WWE, especially because they were like the only promotion out there in that level outside of WCW in the States, was extremely competitive. You had to be the best of the best. You had to have a certain level of endurance and make a huge level of sacrifice to be at that level. And Matt was truly trying to reiterate that to a lot of the Omega wrestlers that had their eyes on going to WWE. So I think that was a very important learning experience for Lita to see that Matt and Jeff had already been behind the scenes. They had already worked in a certain capacity with WWE, even though they hadn't had their debut as we know it now to be. They saw and had understood what it meant to be in WWE and what it took. So I think for those wrestlers that were in Omega, the Omega promotion, that was a great experience to have someone like Matt and Jeff that can really give them that insight on what it took to be at that level. And I think that was something that really pushed Lita to fully stand in the fact that she wanted to be a wrestler, because I think that was a huge motivator to see someone like Matt specifically, who was very driven and very disciplined, show her this is, what it takes to be a wrestler. And she didn't run away from that. She was actually really excited to bring that level of intensity. And she really started to feel like with Matt and Jeff, she had a home, she had a community in the wrestling world. And I think it's something that has stuck with her, even to this day. And while traveling and still trying to get some experience on the road, Lita really started working with Lexi Fife a lot, and they created a bond. And Fife had connections with ECW. So when ECW was in their town, both women took a chance and introduced themselves to Tommy Dreamer. And Tommy was nice enough to let the ladies work out in the ECW ring. And they immediately got into the ring with Super Crazy and Tajiri. And Lita started mimicking the moonsaults that Tajiri and Super Crazy were doing. And they saw them, and this really caught the eye of Tommy Dreamer. So after seeing that, he pulled her to the side and asked her to put on a 5-minute match with Lexi Fife that same day. And after a decent enough match, Lita was asked to come back out that night to do a run-in. And having a successful run-in, Paulie Heyman took Lita to the side after the show and told her that he wanted her to work for him. So Lita wasn't actually too familiar with ECW at the time, but she wasn't going to turn down the gig. And this proved to be a very, very good decision that Lita made about accepting this. And this is where I want to stop with the first part of my book review for Lita's book, because I want to really dive into Lita's experience with ECW and then Lita's experience with her career in WWE from that beginning, that debut, all the way up into 2003. So, and because I think that deserves, the right amount of attention, I know I had to break this up. But I really hope that so far you've enjoyed this new book series that I'll be doing for the month, starting off with Lita, A Less Traveled Road. And I hope that you enjoyed seeing almost from a very young age how Lita has had all these experiences in life and all these different loops and roads that she traveled, and how exciting and thrilling and sometimes scary it could have been for her. But then also with her kind of like betting on herself and feeling like, hey, I'd rather have an experience than ever regret not doing something, how that actually worked out for her and how that put her in very exciting and alluring positions in her life where she took a chance and she was brave, and did a lot of things that many of us would probably say in theory, but we would never actually do it. Like just getting up and going to Mexico, not knowing anyone there, not knowing exactly where you can watch wrestling and where you should be and what place you should actually go to receive training, and just doing it. So I really wanted to get through that part of her journey. But in the next one, really dive into her established wrestling career as it was with her stint in ECW. And then, of course, her amazing run in WWE up until 2003. So I hope you enjoyed this part one, and I'm very excited to do part two very soon. So I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the Ladies Wrestling Grio, and I will definitely see you soon. Bye.